A lot of audience are complaining that female comedians in China talk too much about marriage and having babies pressure. They're like, oh, look at the male comedians. They talk about how the society works, how the capitalists are, like give pressure to all the slaves, etc., etc.
I think that like for women, weirdly, people seem to think it's cool that I'm a comedian, but there definitely is a stereotype about like male comics that they're like, dirtbags and alcoholics and stuff. And
Mm.
there is some truth in that. Not all of them, but there's a lot that are just like that.
Hi, welcome to Overlap, a show produced by US independent media outlet Breakthrough News in collaboration with WaveMedia, a private media house in China. Hi everyone, my name is Norah. I'm a stand-up comedian in China. I do stand in both Mandarin, English, a bit of Shanghainese, and also a bit of Japanese. And today I'm so honored and so happy to be joined by Kate Willett. Kate, over to you.
Hello. I do stand up in English only. You are doing way better than me. So, yeah. Just kidding. It's great to see you again, Nora. Um,
Yes,
and
can't
I say
believe we meet in this
again
way.
because a few years ago, I think in 2018, I actually got to do stand up in China, and we met each other. You were on a couple of the shows that I did. When Rachel from Breakthrough contacted me, it was like, there's this comedian from China named Norah, and I was like, this is gonna be so weird, but I actually think I know her, which I was like, she must not have been expecting?
Yeah, I'm so glad to see you again. And since you also performed in China before, I just wonder, like, how do you feel? Is it different, like performing in US and China?
That's a really good question. Like the shows that I did in China were comedy shows in English, and that seems to have a very specific audience that was a lot of Americans and a lot of people just like from all over the world, really. I didn't really find it to be that different. It mostly seems like similar to me. I don't know. I'm trying to think because I feel like I had sort of a little hang up, like, oh, is this different? Like, do I have to adjust something? But I don't know, like it seems like it was for the most part really similar. What do you think about that?
That's so funny because I think it's because of the language differences. For example, when I'm performing in China in English, I think there are still quite a bunch of audience. They are local Chinese people. So first of all, like the age is much younger on average. I think on average, the audience here for both Chinese and English shows are only like 20 something, almost 30, like the average age. And also like the mindset that they come for comedy show is very different. Like, because it's such a new form of art. I think people are still learning what is stand up. People are still figuring out like what's the line between comedy and being too offensive. I think there are people still be saying that, oh, you're being too mean, too harsh. You're talking in such a rough way that shouldn't be comedy. That's just exalting, and that could be the difference here.
I think that makes sense. I mean, I also think that I can imagine that like expectations that people put on me are totally different because people are like, "Oh, this is an American person. She's going to be offensive." Like that's just whereas like I mean, I guess I don't know because the first place I ever did stand up that was outside of the United States was actually India. And I did
Wow.
comedy in Mumbai, and like it's definitely a bit more conservative when it comes to talking about sex, especially for women. And I was really worried about it. I had some friends from India, and I was like, is this going to offend people? And they were like, no, not at all, because it's like people here like watch Friends and have like they're consuming the same media as you, and I just could imagine that like people would be like a bit harder on you, if that makes sense. I don't know. I hope I'm
Yeah,
now I'm
like
like, am I being offensive? I don't know. Yeah.
No, it definitely happens. So, what happens is that like if I post a video of me doing stand-up English online, there'll be people saying that, oh, like if they see like Chinese audience, it's like, oh, why is a Chinese talking to a Chinese audience in English? Like, should she not be using Chinese, like her own language? And also, there are some like funny but self-contradictory comments. A comment number one will be like, oh, she speaks with um like a Chinese accent. It's a shame that her parents pay her money to learn English, but she still has accent. She doesn't sound like local enough. And comment number two would be like, she sounds too American. She lost all the essence of Chinese culture. A shame of her being a Chinese person but not having a Chinese accent. So I think people just having like really, like I don't know, like funny ways of seeing things in China for doing comedy. But what you're saying really like triggered me to ask a lot of questions about your experience performing in different countries because that's so amazing. I didn't expect India to be your first stop. What do you think is the like most opening crowd and the most tricky or interesting crowd that you performed in terms of countries or cities?
I haven't done stand up like in a ton of different countries, and when I went to India, I was just going to my friend's wedding there, and I thought I might as well try doing stand up here because that will be like a really different
Ooh.
experience. I've never done stand up in another country, but I've done stand up in the UK, like both England, Scotland. I've done stand up in Australia. I've done stand up in China and India, and I think that's it. I would definitely like to go more places, but like, I mean, country I feel most comfortable performing in, definitely the United States, right? Like this is where I learned how to do comedy, and it's even really city specific, if that makes sense.
Mm,
Like when I
yeah.
went back to San Francisco to do some shows because I started comedy there and I was like, I can totally just do the thing that I know how to do, that I trained to do, like for my first like five
Mm,
years of comedy or whatever. And when I moved to New York, I had to, kind of like learn sort of a different style out here in a way. In San Francisco, when I was starting there, like people have a lot of patience for like long stories and like as long as it's funny people will kind of really listen and sort of go with you, and in New York the audiences are trained to want like jokes, and I think it actually made me a
ah,
better comedian to like have both experiences, right? So where I can like expand something to longer but also make sure that it has a lot of punchlines. But I guess the places that it's like easiest, like other countries that is the easiest to do stand up in, probably like England, like it's probably the most
mm,
similar. Australia too. I mean, obviously really different culture, but it's it's like we have like, it's everyone is like a native English speaker in the audience for the most part, and like there's no language barrier. And most different, probably China, because like that was like a lot of people that I was interacting with, it was like their first time seeing a comedy show ever because like as you know, stand-up comedy is like
yeah,
brand new, and so but
yeah,
it was really fun.
yeah. I feel like comedy is about like revealing your life as part of the truth to other people. The very reason why I went to Burning Man is because my I broke up with my boyfriend then, and I was reaching the age of 30. And back then, my mom was desperately wanting me to get married, and she think that if you're not married by 30, it's pretty like nightmare thing to situation to be in. And I was like feeling the pressure from my parents, and I was talking to my friends because I study in US a bit as well. I talked to my friends there, and they were like, "You are an independent woman. Why would you be bothered by the pressure from your parents? You should just like say, oh hell, mom, I'm not listening to you. Okay, I'm my own person. I am responsible for my own life." And then I realized that it's the huge culture difference that's I've been living. I grew up with my parents. I get so much influence from them. It's really hard to just cut off the bond and say that, hey, from now on, your opinion means nothing to me, and I'm gonna do me. It
Of
just it just
course.
won't
Yeah.
come off that naturally. So parents pressure, like peer pressure, and also social norm pressure, all these things would just even for us, for me, I think I am pretty open minded. I will still feel the pressure, and I will also lose faith in myself, thinking that okay, I lost another man. Like, would I be able to find another man? So that was the reason why I went to Burning Man because I really wanted to experience something different. I wanted to have a wild adventure and tell myself I can do this, because I'm horrible at camping. So I basically write a suicidal note. It's a true story. And place at home just in case my parents realize I didn't come back, and they can see that note and know that, oh, I was doing something brave. So that's one. And also like the very choice that you have to give birth to babies as a woman. What I find out funny recently is a lot of audience are complaining that female comedians in China talk too much about marriage and having babies pressure. They're like, oh, look at the male comedians. They talk about how the society works, how the capitalists are, like giving pressure to all the slaves, etc., etc. And then I was like, but these are the pressure those people won't have, right? Like,
Yeah.
they won't be pressured to get married because parents think that even if they're 40 and ugly, they can still get a woman somehow. And they won't be pressured to have a baby because all they need to take is maybe as short as like 10 seconds of effort, and they have to give away that burden to the poor woman. So that's the thing. Like, I feel like talking too much, audience think that you're very narrow-minded. But if you don't talk about them at all, I feel like it's not the true life. So I don't know if that's also the same in US.
I think it is. Yeah. What you were saying right now, I definitely related to. I mean, I write comedy about like my personal life and relationships, not exclusively, but like a lot. Probably like 80% of the jokes that I write are in that vein. And I do think it's because it's something I think about a lot. And I do think that part of the reason I think about it a lot, in addition to just being a person that wants to connect with other people like any human being, I think that it is because, there is pressure. I don't think it's the same degree of pressure. My parents probably are disappointed that I don't have a kid, and they have like kind of made like passive aggressive comments about it at times, but I don't know, like I feel it a little bit that they're like, oh, you're like a woman and you're not married, but I don't think it's anything near the level that you're describing at all. Maybe 3% of that. But I know, like, for me, the fact of like feeling like a quote unquote like failure as a woman for like not, doing or even particularly enjoying or wanting to do this very like family lifestyle. Like, I don't know if that's like a great fit for me, but it's like, yeah, I definitely think about that and like reckon with it. And it's a really frustrating part of life sometimes. And I can't really even conceptualize what it would be like to have that times a lot more,
How about like being a comedian? Like, how is that received as an occupation in US? That's also something I wanted to compare between US and China.
I think that, like, in terms of like the people in my life, like my family, for example, I started getting a lot more support from them once I started getting like more success. Like when I got on like a set on Netflix and stuff, they were like really excited for me. But it took me like a long time to sort of like prove to my family that I could actually earn money doing this. And it wasn't like a thing where they were like telling me not to do it, but it could just like hear that they were like, why are you so irresponsible or whatever. But I think it's weird because I don't know. I think that like for women, weirdly, people seem to think it's cool that I'm a comedian, but there definitely is a stereotype about like male comics that they're like, dirtbags and alcoholics and stuff. And there is some truth in that. Not all of them, but there's a lot that are just like that, Yeah. Well, how about
Okay.
like for you, what's the answer to that question? Yeah.
Yeah, like, because it's such a new form of art. So when I started, all my parents know, or all my dad know, is that he has to drop me off at all like those weird bars, and I just like looking pretty and go there. And then he see like it's just like dirty bar. I talk to strangers, I entertain them for no money because it was open mics, and I just leave into the next bar. So for a while, my parents just think that I got a very bad and abusive and PUA type of boyfriend. So they were like, "Oh, if anything happened to you, just talk to us, okay? Don't hide everything as a secret." And I
Oh
told
my
them,
gosh.
"There's no
Oh
guy,
my gosh.
there's no weird guy. It just comedy, this form of art." And they were like, "But you're not getting paid." Like, what kind of formal art is that? I was like, I'm practicing. They were like, why do you have to practice in front of other people? Like, play the violin, just practice at home. I was just like, but it's different, like this and that. So I have to explain a
Yeah,
lot.
you can't
And
practice comedy without, yeah.
no, right? Like I had to practice. So that's something that they don't really understand. They just think that I got very bad influence from some friends. And then also number two is that like when I'm doing comedy, I spend so many time on that because I back then I still got a job. So they were like, oh, now you don't have time for dating. Like, because when I started comedy, I was already reaching 30 and I think I was already 30. So they were like, oh, but then 30 is a golden age that you have to go there and leave yourself some time for dating and marriage and stuff. And then I was showing very little interest in that. So they were also very, not happy about it. And the third thing is the worst thing is that I really wanted to bring them to a show where they can see that what I'm doing is fun. So I took them to a show which there's only four audience because it was the eve of Chinese New Year. It's like the Christmas Eve, like everybody's home with family. And I dragged them to this one show that urgently needs audience. There's no audience, it's just me, my parents, and there's like random guy one and random girl one. And then I remember the comedian before me, she did some super like sexual stuff, and everything is in Mandarin, by the way. And then my dad gets super uncomfortable because he was in the first row. So he looked at my mom, and my mom got really angry. And then she looked at me, and I got really awkward. So I just don't look at them. I just look away. And then when the comedian came off the stage, I went up and say my set. And my parents, nobody laughed, by the way, just nobody laughed. Everybody just like give a smile or stiff face.
Oh my
And then
God,
we
that's so
went back.
awful.
I know it's like everything is so off. And then we went home. Remember, it's like a Christmas Eve, right? So we went home, we had dinner, and my parents talked nothing until we almost finished dinner. My mom just talked to me and she was like, honey, I think you should respect yourself more and love yourself more. And I was like, oh my God, parents, it's not what you think. I'm not just hanging out with girls who talk dirty. It's comedy is a real thing. So I took a lot of time
Yeah.
to convey to them or like persuade to them that comedy is actually something that you can bring your parents. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something that will ruin my future. So yeah, it just yeah, it's just really different.
And how are they about it now? Like at this
um
time, what's their
so my dad is still concerned that I one day I will be not likable to the audience. He just like, oh, like people really come and go, like it's better just to keep a job. And also my mom think that oh, things will be so different when you start to have a baby. So she's not worried that I'm gonna do it forever. But I actually made up my mind pretty early in the career that I really wanted to stand up until I'm maybe 40, 50, then 80 years old because I think it's such a fun thing to do. So I just don't tell them that's my decision, but
yeah.
I would just keep doing it one day until they're not able to say no to me. Um, yeah, so that's how they do. I think what turns them around is because when I get on some TV shows, and then their friends, like people of their age, test them saying that, oh, I saw a daughter, like my kids really like her, and then my parents are like, oh, if my friends like it, then it must be legit because it's the same friend who said that your daughter should marry soon. Like I think they're just like
Yeah.
under even more peer pressure than I am now. So yeah.
I think that's kind of what turns it for my parents too, in a way where like their friends thought it was really cool that I was like on TV and stuff, and they were like, "Oh, your daughter's doing well," and my parents were like, "She is. Like, is your daughter?" You know. I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, this was motivated by concern, probably like a lot of love, but anyway. Okay, so in terms of like stand-up comedy in China, like I know that you mentioned that the art form started in China around 2010, but like people almost certainly probably saw stand-up specials on Netflix or HBO or whatever. I don't know. There's like you guys have streaming services, yeah? Like there's no.
Uh, so I think that it's a funny question, but we are able to show those video clips, but on our own platforms, and
Oh,
it's
that
all
makes
in
sense. I've heard about that.
yeah,
Yeah.
like but to answer questions, yes, we do see those clips or like those videos, but I think there's this connection between, oh, that is also stand up and this is also stand up. Because to start with, like the translation of stand up in China is very different. It's not translated directly as stand up. It's translated as talk show in China. So it was confused with a lot of talk show TV program up front. For example, like the Late Night Show, for example, the Jimmy Kimmel Show, and etc. etc. So
Yeah.
the Daily Show, for example. So people were like, oh, it's just people talking funny, or maybe you can interview a person. So there was a period of time people are confused of what it really is. Now I think they're getting more information or knowledge about it. But back then it was just so different. And also the funny thing is that because it's people talking funny, right? So people also confuse it with like fun speech or inspirational speech. And if you,
Oh,
for
okay.
example, when I'm doing English shows, right? And there's like parents bring their kids to here for education in English. So when they see comedians, they don't see how funny the comedians is. They see how many international comedians there are. They go, oh, there are some American comedians. Now she can learn some American accent. That's great. Oh, there are some British accent. Nice. She's getting, exposure from different countries. And they will drop their kids here, kids, which means maybe 16, 17, 18 years old, high school students, drop their kids here. And then when the show is done, they will pick them up again and saying that, how did you enjoy the lesson today? Which teacher
Oh my
do you like the
gosh.
most? And the students will be like, oh, that's not teachers. It's called comedians. You know nothing,
That's
mom. And the
so
mom like,
funny.
as long as you love it, I pay the money. I think it's worth it. Let's go home and see the teacher next week. So that happens as well. Yeah, just very, very new in the industry.
Are your jokes like, because I know you mentioned you do comedy, I think you named like five languages. Are your
Three
jokes
languages and one dialect.
okay? All right, so three languages. Are you telling different jokes, or is it the same jokes translated, or like how does it vary?
So I think the Japanese is definitely a very different language to do comedy in, or to do a fun entertainment stuff in, and they have their own culture. So the Japanese jokes are just way more different from, it's like remotely relatable to anything I do in Chinese and English. So it's a different set. But then for the Chinese and English set, I think there are overlaps, but not that much. I think, for example, like I was doing this bit, for example, races, right? Like if we were talking about races, like how the difference between, like white people, black people, and Asian people, etc., etc., people wouldn't get the joke if it's in Chinese. Like we don't even do jokes geographically on the geographical difference, if that makes sense. Like just less on that. It's more on general terms. But then I think for the English set, I think the topic is broader. And also I think that comedians, especially Chinese comedians, when we are doing shows in English, we feel more like flexible to really express our feelings. It's almost like we're hiding behind a persona. For example, if I was talking about, my uh, relationships, or like, for example, when it's related to sex, I can say that in English, but I feel even so uncomfortable to perform that on stage. Like people can feel that I'm intimidated by my own jokes. The audience actually texts me saying that, hey, your face blushed when you're talking about your experience with a boyfriend. Like that's pretty funny, but I feel like you're not comfortable with the material. But now when I was doing that in English, everything's fine. So yeah, like the topics is different, and then I think the cultural understanding is also different in two languages, so they couldn't be the same the whole
That
time.
makes sense. Like when you were doing stand-up comedy in the US, because you've done stand-up comedy here, did you notice like a difference in the way that you were performing or how you felt performing?
Yeah, I mean, I really love it. I think that it's such a great place to train your stand up because, first of all, I think in most of the country, or most of the cities, I think stand up is such a mature market that you can just go there and perform. But it's not the case here. Like we only have several cities that's like very opening to stand up. Other cities, it's hard to sell tickets. And then also in US, I think it's so diverse. Like you're basically, I feel like it's performing to different countries when I was performing in Austin and San Francisco. and New York. It's like people are so different the way they see jokes and it also the venues. Like what I'm amazed by San Francisco competition is that I think in one round they actually put us in 4 different cities with 4 literally different venues, right? It
I
was
did
a
that
bookstore,
competition when I
right?
started.
It was a
Yeah.
bookstore, it was a wine house, it was a beach restaurant, and it was a theater. So I see mature seasoned comedians like you, like they can't just break the ice with different jokes and different vibes and different personalities in the beginning of the joke. I couldn't do that because I only have my own set. I feel like that's just a huge difference. Like we are still, I think we are very young in career in terms of comedy. So we are just still working on set. I think working on set as well as the rooms and the audience is the next step yet. But I think a lot of comedians in US already super get used to it and they're doing a great job. So yeah, we just have to learn so much.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I did that competition when I was like, I think 2 years into comedy. I came in dead last, I think. But that's, it's like different kinds of comedy, right? Because it's like
Yeah.
the kind of comedy I write, like I write jokes and like my vibe on stage is more like mellow, like sort of, I'm not like super like wild high energy and like crowd work, and you're right, like that's the kind of stuff that like wins competitions. But as you like evolve, it's going to be interesting to just see like what are the sort of like specifics of the art form that are coming out of China, because it is going to be like there is going to start to be like more sort of like noticeable differences as like paths diverge. I think that's really cool. We'll have to watch some comedy together. I probably wouldn't get a lot of the jokes, I'm guessing. Would I get the jokes? Would it be funny to me?
I think you would get at least half the jokes because another half relies on living experience in China.
That
So
makes sense.
you might lost in some of the references that we are using here. And there's another thing, like when we were talking about, like the doing comedies here, um, I feel like when we perform abroad, that we have to really throw away a lot of the material because a lot of the material are China related or China
That makes
experience
sense.
related. Yeah, but I feel like um, when you are doing comedy, I feel like it's more like generally it's highly relatable in some ways. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel it's very different. Would you say that when you perform in China, like when you are saying some really cultural related stuff, people here will be the local audience here would be less understanding on that?
Culture, like stuff related to living in the US, or
Yeah, do you recall any of the jokes that you were doing here that received well in US but not so much in China? Do you recall back then?
I probably made a sort of specific effort to take out anything that I was like sure was
Uh,
pretty local. So I probably
mm,
did end up like doing more stuff about, relationships and stuff that
mm-hmm,
like didn't depend on like knowledge, cultural knowledge or like geographic knowledge, like in any sort of specific way. But I
mm-hmm,
mean, like in general, it was, I mean, the shows that I was doing in China, there were people from all over the world. It was like, it wouldn't have even really been possible to like think about what might resonate, because there was like a Chinese person next to a Serbian person next to a French
mm,
person, super like expat crowd. I don't know, maybe like 20% people that were born and lived in China, but I don't know, it's
mm-hmm,
just like the comedy and English scene there feels so different. You know what I mean?
mm.
But
Yeah, yeah. But that's
um
I think that sounds like just more like there's more diversity here in audience when you perform in China, which might not be the case anymore when you perform here again. We would highly recommend you to come here because there will be a lot more like new audiences who might have seen your Netflix special online. But I think a lot of them will be Chinese audience. Like they're just very, very new to like a comedy yet. But you are gonna enjoy that. I think you're gonna do great here.
I really want to come back. I really, really want to come back. And I want you to come to New York too. It would be so fun to hang
Oh,
out with you
I
here. And
know.
like,
I know.
yeah, like it would just, I would love to walk around New York with you and just be like, I don't know. This has been a really fun conversation. I'm just really glad that we got to talk, and I feel like I've just learned so much, and it's just cool to see how far you have come, because I remember when I met you, it was just clear that you were so extremely like in love with comedy and just determined that you were going to do this with your life. And I'm not at all surprised that you have completely stuck with it and just gotten more and more opportunities. It was really obvious, even at that time, that that was going to happen.
Thank you. Comedy is so much fun. Comedy before man, like my motto on my graveyard, probably.
To me, like, it's just really cool that we could sort of have this conversation and just like, this is such a cliche point, but just to realize like, wow, we actually have like so much in common. Like our experience of being like a female comedian is actually like really similar in some ways. There's other
Yeah,
differences, but it's just, I think that it's like really easy to assume, like when you're thinking about like particularly countries where like it's completely different language, to just think like, oh wow, like everything's different. People are probably totally different. But like that's not the case. Like there's just so much shit that we have in common, So
yeah. I'm so glad to hear that your family also give you pressure. I thought American people are all like I don't give a shit type of attitude.
there's your sense of humor. So thank you so much.
Thank you too. It's lovely talking to you.